so we're recording. James, Val, good to see y'all. All right, I'll turn it over to Rob and we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Martin. Hello, everybody. In the room, we have there's quite a few people in the room. Since you can't see them, I'd say there's about 20, isn't there? 18 or 20. So there's a lot of people here tonight. So I guess they were all interested in being peacemakers. Dick said that, he said that he wasn't here last week on Pure in Heart because he is a model of a pure in heart person. So I told him we mentioned him last week, but he probably didn't know that category. Well, as you know from the email that I sent out, tonight is really a very, very difficult, simple, easy, but also a very hard beatitude. And that is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. The difficulty in it is perhaps even a little bit environmental right now, because I don't know about you, but for me personally, I went through the 1960s when we had a lot of problems in our country and in our nation, a lot of division.
Like we don't now?
Like we don't now. But that's what I was going to say, is that it seems like there's a tremendous division within our nation right now. And I'm just praying that somehow, some way, God will bring people together so that we have harmony and work together to make our nation great again. I just think that it's an emblem of the division that is part of our human heart, and we need to really strive to do that. So we're going to talk a lot about some of the things that have been in the past events, some of the things that what we can do to try to harmonize, to be able to live as peacemakers. It's not an easy thing to do. Remember back in Eden, when Adam and Eve lived there? It was a beautiful place. There was a garden. There was lots of trees. There was fruit from which God gave them. God's presence was in the garden. Everybody got along with each other. Even the animals got along with each other. They didn't eat each other up, and the trees didn't have any fungus. There was no weeds in the garden. God was there. It was a beautiful place. It was perfect. It was just a paradise. And does anybody remember what happened in the Garden of Eden? Besides having 2 children? Sin came in, and it really went downhill from there. I'll tell you what. Just think, I would have been around with Adam and Eve, but I'll tell you what, their sons, Cain and Abel, especially Cain, was not a very good person. He got angry because his brother Abel's sacrifice was accepted, but his was not. Well, soon that caused him to have this anger in his heart, and he wanted to kill his brother. And the Lord said to him, do you do well to be angry? Sin is crouching at the door, and it wishes to have you, but you can't control it if you want to. Well, he didn't. And so the first incident of killing was found in the 2 sons of Adam and Eve. Abel died, and Cain slew him. From then on, it went downhill from there, didn't it? It went along until Noah came along, and every inclination of the heart of man was evil. And they were killing each other, murdering people. It was just violence all over the place. Every wickedness that you could imagine had taken place. And so God destroyed the world with a flood. And that was the end of that society and world system. But it still didn't abolish it, did it? Even Noah's family, the 8 that went on the ark, still propagated, and pretty soon their children started fighting, and wars continued, and we see it in the Bible. The Old Testament is filled with battles and wars, and some people say, how can you reconcile the Old Testament wars, and especially God's command to go into areas and destroy nations and peoples, with what Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers here? How can we reconcile those 2 things? Well, I think it's very difficult to do that. The challenge for us is to be peacemakers in a war-torn world. We live in a world, a society right now that is divided, in disharmony with one another. You could call the society a dysfunctional family because, we've got so many issues and so many problems. There is a situation that we need to decide though. That is, is it ever right to actually fight? Do you think that Jesus would approve of fighting another person? Do you think that Jesus was a pacifist? Do you think that he would say that no war is good? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Was Jesus a pacifist? What do you think? Any opinions? What about when Jesus went into the temple and threw over the money changers' table and wreaked some havoc there? Now, I think Mark had a Sunday school lesson about that not long ago, and the Sunday school lesson seemed to water down a little bit, maybe, that, Jesus really wasn't meaning to hurt anybody, which is probably true, and he really wasn't trying to destroy things, which is probably true also, but he was what? Confrontational. I mean, he was picking a fight. I think he was picking a fight. Well, how does that reconcile with Jesus being a pacifist? Or can be? What about the time when Jesus was walking and he saw a fig tree with no fruit on it? And he said, tomorrow I'll return, and if there's no fruit on you, that's it. And he did. He zapped the tree, and the next day the tree was dead. That doesn't sound like a real pacifist thing to me. It doesn't sound like he was actually being a peacemaker there. Do you think that Jesus was a pacifist? I don't think he was. The challenge for us is to not just try to be peacekeepers, because some of us try to just keep the peace, but to be a peacemaker, and there is a difference. I think that the reason that it's easy to be a peacemaker is because our hearts have been changed. Like Dick, our hearts are being purified. And because of that, there is this substance within our heart called the Holy Spirit that desires to see peace. We want to have people in harmony with one another. We want to see people agreeing with one another. Have you ever been in a church situation or a church setting where the people wrangle with each other so much that, it was really high tension? Not in the church. So apparently, even though we have that desire, because our hearts have been reborn and regenerated, and we feel in our hearts that we want to have peace. We want peace for the world. Let there be peace with me, we sing. Yet we also have a real problem because we also have a mind. And that mind needs to make decisions about how peace is achieved. Is peace achieved by just sitting back and letting everything go and not fighting for something that is honorable and true and just? What's negotiable and what's non-negotiable? If we would say that, we think that the Bible is the Word of God, is it worth fighting for? If we think that Jesus Christ is really the way, the truth, and the life, and someone is persecuting us, which we'll talk about next week, is it right for us to fight in response to that? Soren Kierkegaard was a famous theologian, a German theologian back in Lutheran Church back in the days of the 20th century. He lived during the time of Adolf Hitler. He went to seminary, he became a pastor, he became a writer. He's written many books. The Cost of Discipleship is one, Littered Papers from Prison. And what he did is he decided that it was more important for him to assassinate Adolf Hitler than it was a justified killing. So he and several of his compatriots, all of them believers and Christians, decided that they would plot to assassinate him. And it almost went off, but the problem is it did not kill Hitler, and the problem is he found out that he did it. Yeah. So he ended up in prison and died and gave his life because of that cause. I remember one of the quotes from Letters and Papers in Prison that said, "If only I was more of a criminal, I might have been able to succeed in assassinating him." He thought that to get rid of Hitler would solve some of the problems and issues in the world at that time. He debated, was it right or was it wrong? So many issues are like that. For example, There was in the 5th century, there was a writer by the name of Saint Augustine. Many of you will recognize that name. He was a very famous man and famous writer in the Catholic Church at that time. And he wrote about what is called a just peace, a just war. And some of the principles of those just wars, well, let me just read what one of the things he said. He said, Ilista bella ubilatur inoris. Now, those of you that don't know Latin, does anybody know what that means? No, not really. It means just wars to avenge injuries. Just wars to avenge injuries. For example, vindictive justice. For example, shall we say that if someone kills someone, then we have the right to turn around and kill that individual, perhaps in a court of law? He stated you do. He says there is a right and there's a cause that is just when you're creating justice, when you're having justice created for that. And he said that it can be offensive or defensive. For example, if someone attacks you, he said it's right and just to defend yourself, but it's also right to be offensive in trying to right the wrong that someone has done. Very interesting, isn't it? What's so interesting about that is that was one of the basis for the Crusades later on in the era of their issues with Muslims and Islam. The Crusades, if you read about it, was considered a holy war. A holy war. Now, Pope Irvine II was the Pope at the time. And he is the one who determined that there was going to be crusades in the Mohammedan areas. Now, there was nobody that wrote about his meeting that he had with these counselors at the time, but there were 5 people that received reports, or many people that received reports. And there has been studies done to find out what were the basic things that he spoke about. What reasons did he give for the crusades? What was the justification, as he understood it to be, for sending these people down into those holy lands? And these men were, and they'd done a great study of this, and they found, this was the Council of Clermont, and the historian D. Monroe is the one who is able to do this. And he said that there are several key things that he pointed out. First of all, he was aiding the Christians that were in the eastern part of the empire, who appealed for aid because they were suffering under the hands of the Muslims. So let's say that you have a country over in, we'll say, some poor country like Nigeria, and you have many Christians in Nigeria, and they are suffering because they are being persecuted there, and they're asking for aid to come in there. He said that was justified. That was one of the main reasons. The second reason is because of the advance of the Muslims in Spain, that they were creating, they were going into Spain, and they were wreaking havoc among the Christians in that nation. They were at war. They were at battle with them. And he saw that as a right to go in and initiate the Crusades. A third reason was the desecration of churches and also holy sites in the Middle East at that time, that they were desecrating them and destroying them and burning them. So if you see for example, in the Philippines, and some other religion comes and they burn down the churches, he sees that as justification for going in there. He said that the sanctity of Jerusalem, Jerusalem was the holy place, the center of Christianity. That's where Jesus died on the cross, and he saw that as justification. Fourth, he said that there is a fight for righteous wars, that we must fight for righteousness. Sixth, he said there was a promise of eternal rewards for doing God's will. And this is the way they actually were able to recruit a lot of people. A lot of people think that these people went for some sort of glory or glamour or something like that. But there are accounts to show that many of the people actually were pretty wealthy people, and they gave up their properties, their lands. They sold them so they could afford to go into these ventures on the Crusades. And then it was really not beneficial for them. But they did because they believed that it was a holy war for God's cause. And that's the reason they did that. And finally, he said that God will be your leader. Now, isn't that interesting? If you really think about it, I mean, those are kind of some of the things that we might think that are justified to do something like that. And yet nowadays, we probably consider the Crusades as being really evil because it was an offense against the people of that region. And actually, the Crusades are what actually became the seed of rebellion against Christianity by Islam, which through the centuries has accumulated into what we have jihad. Jihad is rebellion because of the Crusades. The roots of that are found in the Crusades. So, pretty bad, isn't it? Can we really justify what took place there? I don't know. But again, it's of the mind. It's a mental thing, a challenge to be a peacemaker. How do we do it? And on what cases is it justified? Another area which I pointed out was the Civil War. Why was it called the Civil War? It didn't seem civil to me. You had brothers and sisters. Joy Lentz had family on both sides. Her family was from Knoxville, and I think Knoxville was a northern city, but you know, Knoxville is in Tennessee. So you got to believe when they sing Rocky Top, it's not a northern song. Some of us have had families on both sides of the war. And what was the reason for the Civil War?
Free slaves.
Free slavery. It was to emancipate the slaves in the South. And they saw that as an offense against Christianity. Many of the Northern did. But you know, there were biblical examples of biblical support given on both sides of the war. Not only did the Northerners say that slavery is wrong, but the Southerners pointed out that in the Bible there was slavery. And if they were allowed to have slaves, why can't we have them? Now we know that many of the people that lived on those, you know, huge plantations were aristocrats and they had lots of money and lots of wealth. And so many of the people in the South just kind of followed along with the leaders at that time. But it was really called in the South, the war between the states. But in the North, it was called the Civil War because it was a civic duty of them to fight for the emancipation of slaves. Now, according to the statistics, there were 620,000 Americans that died during that war and 400,000 prisoner of war, a lot of whom died. There was a prison camp in northern New York, which they took many of the Southern soldiers to, and they died of freezing. They froze to death. And there was a Southern camp of prisoner of war in Georgia, which was, and they didn't treat them cruelly. They just died of disease and everything else. So there was over 1 million, over 1 million casualties through the Civil War. And have we gained a lot from that? Was it justified? Was it right to do that? Were we being peacemakers instead of peacekeepers? Were we actually using our heads to try to make a decision on that? I mean, we see the repercussions today, even in our society. You know, I mean, we just have to think about this past year when we see those things broil up again. The word racism is used again. Now, I'm going to provide just my private commentary on this, so don't take this as a word of law. But in my day, when I was growing up, it was called prejudice. Prejudice. When you treat one person because of he's a different color than everybody else. And I believe that is wrong. I believe it is absolutely wrong to prejudice against another person, no matter whatever their color of skin. But now we've titled it racism, which to me is an ism, like socialism, communism, capitalism. It's an ism. It becomes an institution, so that now we are driving institutions against one another. Instead of worrying about the problem in the heart, which is prejudice, we're worrying about the society, which is an institution. And I have no problem with that. That's just my personal commentary on that. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that, but prejudice is a matter of the heart, and racism is a matter of institutionalism, of elevating it to a place where I think, my personal opinion is, And you know that my favorite pastor was Tony Durant, who grew up in Alabama, is that my feeling is that it's dividing us more than uniting us to talk about it. I think we need to deal with a person's heart, the way they feel towards another person, whether they have a different color or not. So did the Civil War did the Civil War solve the problem? I don't know. After this last year, I'm not real sure. I'm not real positive. And then some of your lifetime, Sid, let's see, probably Sid. Sid, during your lifetime, you may remember that there was a Potsdam Declaration that was made when Harry Truman went over to Germany, and he met with some of the leaders there, and they drew up a scenario that Robert Oppenheimer was creating. Oppenheimer's a real interesting character. He was creating the atomic bomb in New Mexico. And Harry Truman was faced with a decision. Now, Douglas MacArthur, who was the leader in the South Pacific, the general there, said that we can go in and we can conquer Japan. It's the only way that we will get rid of them. We can send our troops in, and we can do it. He said, I know we can do it because we've done other places in the Pacific before. And this was the thing that Harry Truman had to decide. Other people in his staff said, no, the only answer is that you have to go in and you have to drop this atomic bomb on Hiroshima and on Nagasaki. He didn't know how many were going to be used at the time. And he sent out leaflets, he dropped them from airplanes and warned the people to get out of the city, to clear out, because there was a bomb, he said, that were stronger than 2,000 of his B-29 bombs that he had dropped. And he said there will be devastation. He made that decision to drop those bombs for the following reasons. This is what he said. He said, number one, wait a minute, so I missed it. There were 4 reasons that Truman decided to do this. The first one is that he determined that it would cost him 1 million lives to invade Japan if he agreed with MacArthur. Now, understand that in World War II, the account of people killed, I was amazed at the casualties. I thought the United States was one of the highest casualties in all the world at the World War II. But listen to these statistics. The Soviet Union, there were 25.6 million people dead from World War II. The Soviet Union had the most losses of any nation in the world. China had 10 million. Poland had 6.1 million. Germany had 5.1 million. East Indies had 4 million. Japan had 3.2 million. India had 3.0 million. France was 600,000. Great Britain had 500,000, and the United States had 414,000. Now, you take that comparatively. You take 414,000 casualties, American casualties in World War II, and you compare it to the Soviet Union that had 25.6 million people. You can understand why Truman was nervous about that. He didn't feel like it would be worth it if it cost 1 million lives, 1 million Americans. That was double the amount that we've seen already. The second reason is that he was concerned about the Soviet Union. He was worried about the post-war politics because Russia was becoming more and more dominant. They were crushing Japan and Manchuria, and they were fearful. Truman had dealt with Stalin, and he didn't trust him. He did not trust him. He didn't believe he was telling the truth. He was hiding things. And he later came out to be true. He was worried about what would happen after the war because he figured that if they invaded Japan and Russia invaded Japan, then it would be the end. Number 3, it was justice against Japan's cruelty. The Japanese had become, in American understanding, and I wasn't living during that time, but they called them Japs. And the reason they did that is because of the cruelty of what the Japanese did to Americans when they were in camps, prison camps, and how they flew kamikaze pilots into ships and destroyed the whole ship and all the men on board. They saw their war tactics as being cruel, ungodly, unruly, treacherous, murderous. And a lot of Americans had a lot of problems with that. I remember that my mother told me that when she was in class at Northwestern, she was in this class, and over the announcer came that Pearl Harbor had attacked Japan. Or Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, excuse me. What was it, December 7th, 1941. And she said there were about 5 or 6 students that were Japanese in her class at Northwestern. And she said all 5 and 6 of them stood up and left the room because they were so scared of the retribution that would happen. Well, the third reason that Truman gave was because of this justice against Japan's cruelty. And the fourth one is revenge for Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And he said, based on these 4 reasons, he felt like that it was best to go ahead and bomb Hiroshima. And Hiroshima was bombed, and the casualty list from Hiroshima was, I think I wrote it down here somewhere. It was quite a bit. I can't find it on my sheet here, but it was about 1 million people between Hiroshima and Nagasaki that died, and many of them were civilians. Of course, they were obliterated, and they died instantaneously. Most of them did. I think they said that 400,000 people in Hiroshima died instantly. I mean, and their bodies could never be found because they vaporized. That's how powerful that weapon was. So was that justified again? And finally, we have the Vietnam War, which, I grew up during that time, and I saw some of my friends go over to Vietnam in the 1960s, right after they graduated. Some of them went, because they wanted to go. Some of them were later drafted to go into Vietnam. And you know what happened? 1968 is probably one of the worst years in the history of America, because that's when, we saw the peace protesters and all the antagonism, the division in our country was just terrible at that time, because we were so divided on whether that was a just war that we were fighting. According to St. Augustine, it probably was, because you can take offense against someone who is being offended, and you can be aggressive against what you see as an issue, as a moral issue. But was it justified? I think we still wonder about that, don't we? Dick, you were over. I mean, you were not, you were.
I was in North Korea at the time.
You were in North Korea at the time.
Doing my own little battle.
Do we have do we have any Vietnam veterans? Anybody who fought in the war? Well, I do remember that several of my high school classmates did not come home from the war, and several that from college also did not come home from the war. And the trail goes on, doesn't it? Jesus said there will always be wars. There's always going to be wars. You'll never end them. And I don't think we will. I don't think until God finally closes up the world are we going to end the wars that have happened. And how can we best be a peacemaker? How can we be the kind of people God wants us to be? In my study, I say that there is a difference between true religion and false religion. You remember, I said that, they tried to make Jesus a political leader, a military conqueror. The Jews, in their expectations of the Messiah, expected one who would come and deliver them from the Roman Empire. And they would be able to not only be delivered, but they would also begin the process of ruling the world. And so when they saw Jesus, they saw somebody else, one who maybe wasn't a pacifist completely, but one who was willing to die for our sins. That's not the kind of Messiah they expected. I mean, that's not the way they did it.
Rob, let me ask.
Okay,
you're going to get into something else, but the history aspect of it is always interesting to me.
Yes.
When you talk about that. And I think, as you said, the Crusades were started as a holy something, and people did give everything they had to go and fight. And I don't think we can relate to that? Would we give up all of our possessions to go and fight, for, and they thought they were fighting for God. They thought they were on God's
They
side.
did, exactly, David. And that's one of the things when we look back over history, when you say the Crusades, it sounds like a very, very bad thing. We have these things that maybe have been built up or taught to us. And as David is saying, he's saying that they thought they were doing the Lord's work. That's what they thought. They really thought that they were doing God's work, and that it was a holy war to liberate other people. And yet that's not the impression we get today, is it?
No, it's not.
No.
But the other wars you're talking about were more governments. They were political, as you're saying. They're political. But the thing is that individuals got caught up and they had to make decisions. One of my favorite movies when younger was, and it's way before my time, but I watched it as reruns, was Sergeant York.
Sergeant York.
In World War I, and he had to make a decision. He was drafted, he had to go in, he had to make a decision. He said he wasn't going to shoot, remember? And then when it came down to it and he got under fire, he did. And he was a Medal of Honor, was it, Dick?
Yeah,
He got, for his heroism, saving so many people. And that's what he said, is he felt that he was there because he saved those people.
Yes.
That was like a mission that he had.
So could you on Zoom hear what David was saying about Sergeant York, if you know the story? Yes, they could hear you.
Okay, good.
Another person like that was Doss.
Yeah.
You might have heard of Doss. It was actually a movie made about him. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he did not believe in killing people. He was totally a pacifist. But nevertheless, he desired to serve in World War II. And he went to the Pacific there, and what was the name of the ridge? He saved like 70 men. He did not carry a gun. He had no weapon. And yet he climbed up this ridge and rescued the people. And he said, and this is what he said about it. He said, the reason I did that is because God tells us to love everybody, and I love my man.
Hacksaw Ridge.
Hacksaw Ridge, that's right. And so these amazing stories, but I think David is right. A lot of these are more political wars, but the people that waged them oftentimes were Christians. Harry Truman was claimed to be a Christian, and he believed that that was what was best for him, or best for our country, excuse me. So, but there is a difference between people who are trying to create peace in the world versus people who are trying to create violence. David probably has read stories of the violence and the atrocities that have been committed. Oh my goodness gracious. I've seen some of those accounts of even Stalin in Soviet Union during World War II. Just horrible. And you think of the death camps in Germany that the Holocaust created. I mean, just terrible, terrible things. And that is from a bad heart. When Christians go and fight, they go and fight trying to bring peace. And they do so in a manner that is not mistreating other people. Now, there have been times when Americans as well have mistreated others in war. And I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm saying that generally a Christian would go in and treat people with respect. Treat them as, even though they're the enemy, treat them as one who is deserving respect, as made in God's image, like human beings, and not mistreat them like, oh, see, that's why Japanese were they were using people, they were doing surgery on people to see what their heart looked like or their liver looked like, well, with no anesthetic. That's the kind of atrocities that they were doing to people. They were starving people to death. Now, the Japanese emperor, Hirohito, they believed he was God, or a God at least, and he actually believed it himself until after the war, when they reduced him down here. I believe that actually Hirohito appeared on a television show to tell the truth one time in 1950s, I believe it was. And he was just an ordinary citizen, but he also said that he realized that that was totally false, that he was not a god. But if Hirohito said do this, they would do it. They would do it. So, anyway, we have a material kingdom and a spiritual kingdom on page 64 and 65. Our kingdom is spiritual in nature. And we've talked about that in the first Beatitude, and we're going to close next week with speaking about the spiritual kingdom. And this goal is to create peace. In the first paragraph, it says, true religion is about the kingdom, and the kingdom is spiritual in nature. It is invisible, it is internal. Its goal is to create peace. All false religions are the opposite of this. False religion speaks about the kingdom, but that kingdom is materialistic in nature. How do you see that? How do you see that materialistic? Do you think wars sometimes are created because somebody wants something that you have?
Sure.
They sure are.
That's mostly what it is. Right?
That's mostly what it is, David. Matter of fact, if you study World War II, you find out that one of the reasons Japan attacked Pearl Harbor was because Japan had invaded China, and they were grabbing, and they were cruel to the Chinese. I mean, they really did terrible things to the Chinese, and they were grabbing all the material resources of the Chinese. And when United States began a blockade against the oil coming in, the rubber coming in, and all the materials coming in, that was one of the major reasons they did it, because they were land grabbing. They were trying to get more and more territory. Many wars are created because they're materialistic. They're trying to get things that you have. What about communist China? I mean, communist Russia. Going into different areas. Look at Hitler. That's what he was doing. He was just trying to get as many things he could get, grabbing other people's things.
Right, in order to maintain the economy and to build the economy, they had to keep the wars going in order to feed that economy. So they were prospering during.
That's right.
In the war,
As
Germany
long
was
as they were
prospering.
winning, they were prospering.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
But they had to invade Poland because they had to keep that economy going, keep that money.
Don't you see the difference between that kind of thing that goes on where you're getting things for yourself, trying to control other people, versus what the Crusades did, which was basically, they thought, whether they were right or not, they thought they were doing a good thing. In fact, they were giving up some of their property and their wealth in order to go fight in a holy war. Big difference, isn't it? So the kingdom is visible. This material is visible, it's external, its goal is to conquer, to invade, and false religion is horribly and fatally mistaken in its view of what the kingdom is. It is blind to the agenda of God in the world. So this is where, we see the difference between the two kingdoms. And again, it goes back to the motives of a pure heart. If we have a pure heart that wants to see, I remember Archie Bunker saying about Edith. He said to this other man, I think it was Meathead, he said, don't worry about her. Her head's out to lunch, but her heart is right. He said her heart's in the right place. Your heart's in the right place. You got to match the head with the heart and figure out how you can be a peacemaker. And the way to do that is, and I go into this, is there's three kinds of peace according to the Bible. Does anybody remember what those are?
One of them was for God, with God, and
With God.
in God.
With God.
With God and in
The
God.
first one is that we have peace with God, and that was achieved by Jesus Christ. And again, that is internal, it's not external. It doesn't matter what race you are, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter your intelligence, it doesn't matter, your wealth, your status, your social status, it doesn't matter anything. It's all internal, and it has to do with Jesus dying for us on the cross. This is what it says. It says, by faith we have been made acceptable to God, and now because of our Lord Jesus Christ, we live at peace with God. In other words, God has been the one who initiated peace. And when we trust in his son, Jesus Christ, we now have that peace with God. That's what creates this purity in our hearts, because we know that the alienation has been broken down, that separation has been destroyed. Think about it. When Adam and Eve were walking around the garden, they go, hey, God. And you say, yeah, what do you need? Hey, Lord, I have a question. What is that animal right there? He said, I don't know. You go ahead and name it. Okay, I'll say it's a dog. Lord said, it's a dog. That's it. That's good. If they had any questions for God, if they had any problems with God, if they had anything that they wanted to say to God, they would say it, because that bridge was not there. That gap was not there. That distance was not there. They were completely one with God. Now, we're not completely one with God, but we do now, because we have peace with God. that distance has been bridged. You know, we have we have a closer relationship with him. Our heart has been changed. The Holy Spirit lives in our heart. We are part of his kingdom, and we can relate to him. We cry out, Abba, Father. You know, we have that relationship with God. Our hearts have been changed so that because we have that peace with God. And of course, that leads to the second one, which is we have a peace of God. And that has to do with Shalom, because in the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, it was called Shalom, which means the wellness of our soul. It means it is well with my soul. And it is that peace we have within ourselves. Be not anxious. Be not anxious. Be not worried about what you shall put on or what you shall eat. Because God knows you need these things. He'll take care of you. You know, the New Testament and Jesus' relationship with his disciples is filled with that. Remember when he was out on the sea and the storm rose up and he was asleep? And then his disciples woke him up and said, Lord, don't you care that we perish? And he said, peace, be still. Do you not trust in me? Don't you believe in me? Don't be anxious. Don't be worried. You have peace. You have that peace. You have that shalom that you need because you have that. Now, that's a lot easier said than done for those of us who get anxious or who worry about things. But listen what it says. It says, the scripture says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. We get anxious about a lot of things, don't we? We worry about a lot of things. We become upset about a lot of things. Like just last night, we were upset because we were trying to make a reservation. And I'll tell you what, this was just, this was the most difficult thing it was more difficult than writing this book. I mean, you know, my poor wife was just tied in knots. She was just frustrated. She kept sending messages and they message and they wouldn't message and then she'd message and this says this and that says that. I don't know if we got the reservation and you have to wait 24 hours to get the reservation and blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah, just calm down, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. Even if we don't get the reservation, maybe that's what God's will is for us. And today, of course, just at the last minute, it pops up and says, you got your reservation. We've never done anything like that, but it was a great thing of anxiety and worry for us. And yet, it says that the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds and understanding.
Rob, what about
Yes.
those people that you try to be peacemaker, but there are certain people that you just can't have peace with because, they have their fence on your yard or whatever the case may be. There are certain people in this world that you can't make peace with.
Exactly. That's for sure. And that leads us right into the third one, peace from God. Finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. How do we deal with people that, as Billy says, are not peaceable? Okay, so our friends in Hideaway have a fence in their backyard. Well, the guy decides, the neighbor behind him decides he's going to throw his leftover food garbage into his yard over the fence. You just let him do it? You say, well, we'll pray for the poor soul. He sounds like a pitiful man. Or, let the dogs eat it. What are you going to? That's a true story. How do you deal with people like that? Do you confront them? I think you do. Is it right to fight? You got to confront them. You can't just sit back and, let them have their way with you. How do you deal with difficult people that want to fight all the time? Now, I had a solution to this when I was a kid. I didn't like fighting with kids. I saw them out in the playground. They fight after school and stuff like that. Boys, not girls, boys. And the boys would fight after school. I don't know what they were arguing. I don't even know what they're fighting about. I have no idea. But some guys in our class would always try to pick a fight. People that try to pick a fight with you. And this is not husbands and wives. I'm talking about boys in schoolyards. And they would try to prompt you to fight. And the thing I said, I don't want to fight. And they said, well, come on, I want to fight. I don't want to fight. So the good thing about me is I was a track runner. So I could run faster than they could and they could never catch me. One of my best friends, when I was real little, I was just about in second grade. He was the bully of the boss. He was the bully of the block. And he would push kids into basements, that were being excavated. He burned down a field once and he was just a bully. Well, one day he went into my mom's house and I saw him, and we had a penny jar, and he took these pennies out and he stuck them in his pockets and took them back and walked down to his house. And I said, I don't know what got into me. You know, I don't know what, something dawned on me that it was unreal. It was irrational. I walked down and I said, Mr. Borzak, is your son Robert here? And he said, and she said, yes. And so he came out in the yard and he says, what do you want? I said, you stole my pennies. You stole my parents' pennies. You went in my house and you took those pennies. He said, I did not take those pennies. You want to fight? I did. And I blew him away. The poor kid ran into his house and he was just crying to his mommy and just saying, oh, mommy, 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 I didn't do it. I didn't mean to do it. And his mother said, you give him back those pennies. One of the few times I actually did confront somebody who had done wrong like that. But, you know, so how do we deal with people that you can't, you know, that won't deal with you, that don't want to be peaceable with you? Isn't that the reason we have a Christian church, so that we can be with people that all want peace? Joylyn?
I think sometimes you just have to walk away.
Sometimes you have to walk away.
If they keep on and you add to it, then that helps them to continue. So if you can just leave it at a certain point and just walk off, then you've kind of won.
Yes, yes,
Tag it on.
Avoid it, yeah.
yes.
But you gotta pray for them.
Yes, you have to pray for them, but sometimes you just have to walk away. You can't deal with them. I mean, in the middle of our reservation last night, one of our relatives came and said something on a text message that made us upset. And Joylyn says to me, this is in the midst of this problem that we're already having. We were already a little anxious. Well, and we were trying to get the peace in there. And then this relative says something that was really not right. You know, it was not, for one thing, it wasn't true. And, you know, and number three, it was not right for the person to say that. And so Joylyn said, what should I do? And I said, just say, you're wrong, that's not true, and end it there and walk away. And she did. She walked away from it. So sometimes you just can't have to do that, you know. Billy, I don't know, but what do you think? Did we answer
Well,
some
and
of
of course, that's where meekness comes into play too, Rob. I mean, a meekness is not a person who just, you know, whimpers and goes in the corner. He stands up for himself, and just like Jesus did at the tabernacle. So I mean, I think you've got to stand up for yourself, but yet be a peacemaker too. So I don't know that there's any solution. There are certain people that I just don't want to be around. Not Chuck, but anyway. So
I'm a peacemaker, Billy.
Dick says he's a peacemaker.
Hey, Billy, I got a solution. Hire a good lawyer.
Did you hear that, Billy? Hey, Billy, did you hear that?
Yeah.
He said, hire a good lawyer.
Okay, let's go to the children of God, please.
So you know, this is why this beatitude is one of the easiest to understand for us as Christians, but it's also one of the most difficult because we have to every day deal with situations like this. I've already pointed out too last night. I mean, we are constantly in confrontation with each other because we live in a world of sin, and even Christians sin. So sometimes there is confrontations with Christians, other Christians. And sometimes Christians have to stand up for what is right, even with other Christians. When they know that someone is wrong and they don't, you know, they have to stand for what is truth and what is just and what is right. So I think there is a time to do that. We don't do it with fists, but maybe with words. Maybe with words. So in the bottom of page 68, as peacemakers, Irinopoias, we are to strive to create peace where there is war, harmony where there is contention, justice where there is injustice, restoration where there is hatred. See, some of these things are not done just, you know, just running away all the time. In a passive sense, we are to be peaceable, not quarrelsome or instigators of trouble. In an active sense, we are to seek to create reconciliation where enmity and hatred exist, healing where there is hurt, truth where there is deception, and compromise, if possible, where there is bitter decisiveness. This is what the children of God who have the peace with God and the peace of God and the peace from God must do. See, there's a lot in there, because it means, seeking justice for someone, truth where there is deception, helping someone who is hurt. I mean, there's many, many ways that we can be a peacemaker to other people. And I did a devotional for the city workers about 2 months ago. Every Thursday morning, they gather in the city hall, and they invite a pastor to come, or retired pastor to come and speak. And I spoke on the peacemakers. I did this beatitude. And one of the things that I challenged those people to was to find areas where there is disharmony or lack of justice or some problem or some issue, some division, and to pray and seek a way that they can bring people together. Two people maybe that are at odds with each other, two elements that are opposed to each other, two relatives that can't talk to each other anymore, that they know. And it was amazing, because after my talk there, I had several people come up and say, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know exactly who I'm going to go to. And, and they just felt inspired to be able to be that kind of ambassador for Christ, to be able to do that. So I think that's what we have as a calling for us, is to strive where we see it, division and disharmony and hatred or whatever, discord, and try to find the right way, the right manner to be able to heal that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be successful all the time.
Right.
There's times when some people have tried to heal disharmony and division, and they've gotten themselves squished to the middle. But expect that, because that's what the topic is next week. Suffering. Suffering for righteousness' sake. Blessed are you who suffer for righteousness' sake, or you are in the kingdom of heaven. So
I have a situation that I've never had before.
Jean has a situation she's never had before.
I have next door neighbors who are Hispanic, speak no English. I speak no Spanish. I'm not even sure that the name they told me is their name. And I don't know the last name, but he uses a machete to clean everything that he wants to clean. He took a machete and cut down my azaleas.
Did you hear what Jean said? The Hispanic neighbors who have a machete to cut their...
Tried to cut down his magnolia tree with a machete. Did I get mad about my...
cut down his magnolia tree with a machete?
Yeah, Glenn. I thought, oh, that naked tree. But the azaleas and all, I thought, I could go over there and jump them really heavy.
Yes.
For cutting those down with a machete. I didn't. I cleaned it up. Went on about my business. Nothing was ever said. He speaks to me across the fence because he can shake his head and acknowledge that
He can at least speak, he can nod his head in English.
Yes, yes.
But you can't understand anything
No.
he's saying.
Very little bit, and I don't think he understands anything I say.
So there's a total miscommunication. I mean, you don't have any communication.
No.
Now, you do not have an iPhone, do you?
I have a cell phone. iPad, but not.
Okay. Now, there is an app that I have on my iPhone, which it's called Translate.
Yeah.
And you can say a word, or you can write a word in English, and then it will translate it into Spanish. And then you can just say,
Listen, I'm having enough trouble with my landline trying to get it switched over.
I've known people that have said foreign words in another language, and they thought they were saying one thing to the person, and they were saying almost the exact opposite. Instead, have a good day, they were saying, you're a terrible person. So be really careful about how you do that, because that can end you in a heap of trouble. You'll be stuck in the middle for that. Well, does anybody have any thoughts or comments? I think that we pretty well covered the lesson. I mean, I did most of the speaking tonight because it is a subject that I think I really have problems with, because there's so much trouble in our world today. There's so much division in our society and in our nation, and it really troubles me and worries me. But I do have the peace of God in my heart to know that, eventually these things will work out. and truth will win out in the end.
But Rob,
And that-
isn't it a great privilege that someone would say, you are a child of God?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
for
pretty
sure.
amazing that because of your ability to keep peace, that people are going to say you are a child of God.
Yes, they will know you are Christians by your love. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And even your willingness to invade territories that may be difficult. Say you have two parties that are against each other, and you bring those two together. That is what Christ did. Christ came and he brought us together. He brought God and us together, and he brought us together with ourselves. David, you had something?
Well, I was just saying, in the midst of a conflict, the hard thing to do is keep the peace within you, because the tendency is to blow up and get angry, and
Yes.
you're going to say something back, or you're going to get back. But to have that peace within you that you're able to contain it,
Yes.
and that's the hard thing to do.
Yes.
I mean, I have issues with that, but when we could do that, when we can have that peace within us, and then pray for the person you're in conflict with, I think that's what we're asking.
David, that goes back, I don't know if you could hear David, but he was saying maintaining some sort of semblance of not getting angry when situations escalate or there's problems going on. And that goes back to what somebody said about meekness, that's part of the self-control that you have of your emotions, to be able to say, I'm going in this as an arbiter, I'm going in as someone who's bringing the two parties together, or even when you're opposed. And we'll talk about that more next week. Dick, you had something else you mentioned, or no?
No, not on
But
that.
you're good on being a peacemaker.
I am good at
Yes,
it.
he's pure in heart, and he's making peace right now.
I ain't got in a fight with anybody.
Anybody else have thoughts or comments or anything you have questions about? Anything? No?
I think mothers are sometimes peacemakers because children are at odds with each other.
Miss Charlotte says that
Frequently.
often mothers are peacemakers. That's right. And that's a good sample of that mothers come in and they break kids from fighting up, right? Yes, my mother did that several times with us too, because there was a family of 3 boys. And so, we sometimes, it was all my brother's fault, but sometimes. Good thing he's not on this.
But it is recorded.
If he was, I'd mute him. So. Okay. Anybody else? Billy, do you want to close with prayer?
Surely. 2 factors before I do that. Number one, we talked to Amy and Joe Daly. They were about 4 miles from the tornado in Birmingham. So they were fine. So just to make everybody aware of that, it was pretty close to Birmingham, but they're okay. And number 2, I have 2 slots left. If anyone would like to pray Thursday night leading up into Good Friday and to Easter, I would certainly appreciate you letting me know. I have just 2 slots left, and that will be, we have it from 6 o'clock that night all the way to the 6 o'clock the next morning, preparing our hearts in the church for Easter. So if you'd like to volunteer, just give me a call or text me or whatever. But let's bow in prayer, please. Our Father, we are so grateful that we've had the opportunity to go through the Beatitudes with Rob and with each one of us, God. We know that you have touched us individually and collectively, God, so that we could approach the day-to-day activities of our life and live the life that you would have us to live, God. We know that all these instructions that you gave so many years ago are so applicable to us right now, God. It's so easy for us to lose our temper at people. It's so easy for us to not be peacemakers. It's so easy for us not to do all the things that you've told us that we should be doing as children of yours, God. We would only ask that you would forgive us if we fell in the many things that we fell in, God, and that you would be with us and protect us as we go our separate ways and as we get together on the coming Palm Sunday, God. So just bless us and direct us and lead us. And in these things we ask in thy name. Amen.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all. Have a good evening.